For almost 5 years, she had been hanging her wet laundry on my hand-built cedar fence. 4 to 6 items every sunny morning. White silk, pastel cotton, gym towels, her husband's golf shirts. I had asked her to stop in 2019. She had not stopped. I had documented 1,847 separate dated incidents across 4 growing seasons. Her name was Marissa Brockhurst Lockhart, HOA board president of Birchwood Estates, Wisconsin, 45, polished, blonde, certain my Norwegian stave fence was a public laundry rack she had inherited with her house. Mine is Bernhard Kestrel. I am a working textile artist in Dane County. The week my daughter, the Madison real estate attorney, told me my fence was, legally, my fence to do whatever I wanted with, I mixed 11 gallons of permanent indigo mordant dye and coated the entire 220 feet of cedar pickets on a Tuesday morning while Marissa was at yoga. By Friday morning, her white silk gala dress was the bluest dress in Dane County. What would you do if a stranger turned your hand-built fence into her clothesline for 5 years? Where are you watching from tonight? Stay with me. My grandfather Olaf Kestrel immigrated from Telemark, Norway in the spring of 1908 and bought 80 acres of rolling farmland in western Dane County, Wisconsin, 2 months after he arrived. He had been a stave church carpenter in Norway. He had also been, by family record, a master of the traditional Norwegian rose-mailing decorative painting technique that his mother had taught him as a boy. He paid an Oslo-born land agent $1,200 for the 80 acres. He built the original 2-story farmhouse himself out of white pine he milled on the property. He carved every door and every window frame with rose-mauling motifs. He married my grandmother Astrid in 1911. She had come over from Volga that summer at his invitation, with one wooden suitcase and the carved silver brooch her mother had given her at her confirmation. They had 5 children. The youngest was my father Soren Kestrel, born in the upstairs east bedroom in 1924. My father was a Wisconsin dairy farmer for 47 years. He milked Holsteins from 1946 to 1993. He retired the summer my mother Helga died in 1994. He stayed on at the farmhouse alone until his own death in 2003. He had not, in his long, careful life, ever decorated anything. He had not inherited Olaf's rose-mauling hand. The decorative tradition had skipped a generation. It had landed on me. I was born in the same upstairs east bedroom in November of 1960. I had been the child who, by my mother's careful account, sat for hours at the kitchen table at age 3, watching her embroider a tablecloth and asking what the patterns meant. I had been the child who, by age 7, had taught himself to braid a small wool yarn rope from sheep wool my father carded for me in the basement during winter evenings. I had been the child who, by age 11, had set up a small dye pot in the back porch and was experimenting with onion skins and walnut hulls. I had gone to the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1978 to study fine art textiles. I had graduated in 1982. I had gone to graduate school in textile design at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence from 1982 to 1985. I had returned to Wisconsin after my graduate degree because Wisconsin was the only place my hands made sense. I had been a working textile artist for 41 years. My specialty is hand-woven wool tapestry, dyed entirely with plant materials I grow on the property. My dye garden contains, at last count, 23 species of dye plants: indigo, weld, madder, woad, dyer's chamomile, dyer's broom, marigold, coreopsis, black walnut, sumac, goldenrod, pokeweed, bedstraw, and 10 others I have planted across 38 years of trial and error. I sell approximately 12 to 15 tapestries a year through 3 galleries, one in Madison, one in Milwaukee, and one in Minneapolis, at prices ranging between $3,500 and $12,000 per piece. I have a small but steady clientele. My work hangs in the permanent collections of the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Wisconsin Historical Society, and one regional museum in Norway my grandfather Olaf's hometown opened in 1989. The Norwegian Museum bought a small tapestry from me in 1991. The tapestry depicts the original Kestrel farmstead in Telemark. The tapestry is the only piece I have ever sold internationally. I have visited it in person twice. My wife, Ulrika Kestrel, and I were married in October of 1986. Ulrika is 61. She is a retired botanical illustrator who worked for 31 years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Arboretum, where she illustrated the Arboretum's seed catalogs, identification guides, and seasonal interpretive materials. She had been my classmate at UW-Madison in the early 1980s. We had met at a botanical drawing seminar in 1980. She had been a freshman in biological illustration. I had been a junior in textile design. She had laughed at me for trying to sketch a Wisconsin trout lily without first identifying the species. We had been married 4 years later. We have 2 adult children. Anders Kestrel is 38, a working glassblower in Milwaukee with his own studio on the south side. Linnea Kestrel is 35, a real estate attorney at a small Madison firm called Halverson Penrose Sage, where she has been a partner since 2022. Linnea handles small Wisconsin farm property transactions and rural easement disputes. Linnea is, in her own quiet description, the boring Kestrel. She is, in our family's quieter description, the steady center. Our property is the original 80 acres my grandfather Olaf bought in 1908, less the eastern 32 acres my father had sold in 1988 to a Madison commercial developer named Hadley Whitlock to fund my parents' retirement. 48 acres remained. We had bought the property from my father's estate in 2003 for the appraised value at the time. We had paid off the inheritance mortgage by 2018. We had spent the last 20 years restoring the original 1908 farmhouse, expanding my dye garden, and building a working studio barn in the south pasture, where I do the majority of my weaving and dyeing. The studio barn was completed in 2010. It is 60 feet by 40 feet, post and beam construction in the traditional Wisconsin barn style, with a small wood-fired ceramic kiln Anders had helped me build in 2019, a 6-foot floor loom Ulrika gave me for my 50th birthday, 2 smaller table looms, a dyeing room with 24 ceramic dye pots, and a long oak workbench Anders had also built. The studio barn is, by every measure that matters, where my life happens. The fence runs along the south property line of the studio barn. The fence was the first major piece of work I built on the property after the studio barn was finished. I built the fence by hand over the summers of 2010 and 2011, with help from Anders, who was then 24, and learning carpentry alongside his glasswork. The fence is 220 feet long. It is a traditional Norwegian stave fence, vertical cedar pickets 4 inches wide and 5 feet tall, set 6 inches apart, with hand-carved decorative tops that incorporate 12 different rose-mauling-style motifs Anders and I designed together. The motifs are drawn from my grandfather Olaf's original work on the farmhouse doors. Each picket took approximately 45 minutes to carve. The total carving time across 2 summers was approximately 160 hours of my labor and 120 hours of Anders's. The fence is, by my own quiet assessment, the second most important piece of work I have ever made. The first is a small tapestry I wove for Ulrika after her mother died in 2017. The fence is second only because Ulrika is first. We call it the yarn fence. The name is a small Kestrel family joke. The pickets, when seen at a distance from the south, look slightly like a row of vertical yarn skeins on a textile dyer's drying rack. The name has stuck for 14 years. The fence has been admired, photographed, and asked about by every visiting artist, every Wisconsin public radio interviewer, and every gallery owner who has come to the property since 2011. The fence has also been, since 2018, the unrequested clothesline of one Marissa Brockhurst Lockhart of Lot 22 of Birchwood Estates. The dye garden itself deserves a description, because the dye garden is the practical infrastructure that made the indigo response possible. The garden runs along the south side of the studio barn in a rectangular plot approximately 120 feet long by 60 feet wide. The rows are organized by chemistry. The blue-yielding plants, Japanese indigo, woad, and dyer's chamomile for the supporting pale blues, occupy the eastern third. The reds and yellows, madder, weld, dyer's broom, and coreopsis, occupy the middle third. The browns and blacks, black walnut, sumac, and bedstraw, occupy the western third along the studio barn's stone foundation. The garden has been continuously productive since 2003. The garden produces, in a typical year, enough plant material for me to dye approximately 300 pounds of wool fiber and approximately 50 pounds of cotton or linen for fabric artwork. Ulrika maintains the seed bank in a small refrigerator in our basement. She has saved seed from 68 separate dye plant cultivars across 21 years. Some seeds are now Ulrika's grandmother's strain of indigo from a 1955 Norwegian garden in Stavanger, which Ulrika's mother had carried with her to Wisconsin in 1958 in a small glass jar wrapped in muslin. The indigo I used on the yarn fence in April of 2024 was, by direct lineage, descended from those 1955 seeds. The blue Marissa's silk dress would later wear was, by careful family chemistry, the same blue Ulrika's grandmother had dyed her own kitchen tablecloth in Stavanger 70 years earlier. The world is older than the gala dress. Birchwood Estates was built across our south property line in 2014 on what had been the back 48 of an old Norwegian Wisconsin farmstead the Hadley Whitlock Development Group had purchased in 2010, along with my father's earlier 32 acres. 64 homes on lots between 1/2 and 1 full acre. The development was marketed primarily to Madison commuters, a 38-minute drive to downtown Madison, in the kind of new suburb subdivision that Madison had been building west of itself across the 2010s. About 2/3 of the residents commute to Madison for work. The others are professional retirees or remote workers. The HOA is, like most Wisconsin HOAs, a polite organization that runs on small dues, small bylaws, and the careful Scandinavian Midwestern courtesy that defines so much of Dane County. The HOA had been quiet through 2017. Marissa Brockhurst Lockhart and her husband Tatum Lockhart moved into Lot 22, the largest pad in the south row, with our yarn fence as the north boundary, in May of 2018. They had paid $640,000 cash. Marissa had been a commercial real estate marketing director for a Chicago firm for 15 years. She had taken the move to Wisconsin as a lifestyle decision. She had not yet committed to a career direction in Madison. Tatum was a financial advisor at a regional brokerage in Middleton, west of Madison, who managed his own small client base out of a home office. Marissa drove a white Lexus RX. She wore Lululemon to the Costco. She had been raised in Lake Forest, Illinois. She had specific opinions about clotheslines. Her specific opinion about clotheslines, which she expressed at the first HOA membership meeting after she moved in, was that they were trashy and inappropriate in a community of this character. She had introduced a proposed bylaw banning all visible clothesline installations on Birchwood Estates property. The bylaw had passed by a vote of 37 to 19. The bylaw had not affected my property, because I am not in the HOA. Marissa had, however, simultaneously decided that her own laundry deserved sunshine. She had decided, in the privacy of her own backyard, that the yarn fence on the north side of Lot 22, visible from her kitchen window, pleasantly weathered, and, as it happened, directly accessible from her side via a small swing gate the developer had installed in 2014 for landscaping access, was the perfect vertical drying surface. She had begun hanging her laundry on my fence on the morning of the 11th of June, 2018. She had hung 4 pieces, a towel, 2 t-shirts, and a tablecloth. She had taken them in at 4 p.m. when they had dried. She had repeated the practice the following day. She had repeated the practice 3 to 5 times a week through the rest of the summer of 2018. She had moved through fall, taken winter off, and resumed in the spring of 2019. Marissa's transit to the fence on her hanging days was, by my later careful observation, almost ritualistic in its timing and gesture. She emerged from her back door at 8:45 a.m. on most mornings. She carried the laundry basket in her left hand at hip height. She wore one of 2 sets of identical white tennis sneakers, depending on the season. She walked with the swinging, upright posture of a woman who had been formally trained in tennis comportment at age 12 in Lake Forest. She did not, in any of my 5 years of observation, ever paused to acknowledge the fact that she was hanging her items on someone else's hand-carved cedar. She did not, in any of my 5 years of observation, ever wave at our kitchen window or step around the small wooden reference scale I had placed at the property line for my photographs. She treated the fence the way certain Lake Forest women treat a maitre d', as an absent functionary present only to facilitate her own program. The treatment was, by my own quiet analysis across the 5 years, not personal. The treatment was simply Marissa's basic relational mode. She would have hung her laundry on a stranger's barn door in Tibet with the same untroubled efficiency. I had asked her to stop on the morning of the 3rd of August, 2019, when I had walked down to the fence to check a picket that had cracked in a thunderstorm, and had found Marissa actively pinning a pair of her own wet underwear to one of Anders's hand-carved decorative caps. I had said, in my plainest Wisconsin voice, "Mrs. Lockhart, the fence is mine. I would prefer you not hang your laundry on it." She had said, "Mr. Kestrel, the fence is on the property line. I have every right to access the property line. Birchwood Estates community bylaws specifically support traditional Norwegian-style fencing." She had not, of course, mentioned that the Birchwood Estates bylaws also banned clotheslines, and that her own laundry on my fence violated her own bylaw if interpreted with even a small degree of intellectual honesty. I had not pointed that out. I had walked back to the studio barn. I had begun, that afternoon, a quiet documentary record. I photographed her laundry on my fence every day she hung it, beginning the 4th of August, 2019, through the morning of the 23rd of April, 2024. I used the same Nikon D7100 I had used for documentary photography of my tapestry exhibitions for 15 years. I shot each frame with a timestamp, a weather data overlay from the National Weather Service Madison Station, and a wide shot showing the laundry, the fence, and a small wooden reference scale I had set in the ground for measurement consistency. By the end of April of 2024, I had 1,847 dated, weather-stamped, scale-referenced photographs of Marissa Brockhurst Lockhart's laundry on the yarn fence. The photographs were organized in date-ordered folders on 3 separate hard drives. The photographs were backed up to a small cloud storage account my daughter Linnea had set up for me in 2020, when she had first noticed me building the file. The physical impact on the fence was the slower piece of the story. Cedar is a remarkably durable wood. The yarn fence was built to last 60 years under normal Wisconsin weather. Normal Wisconsin weather does not include daily contact with wet textiles. Daily wet contact across a 6-month sunny season in the specific zones where Marissa hung her items caused the cedar to develop a particular type of mildew damage that progressed across the seasons. Wet fabric pressed against cedar in summer sun creates a microenvironment that wood scientists call occluded moisture wicking. The wood weathers unevenly. The grain swells and contracts at a higher rate than the adjacent untrespassed sections. By 2021, I had replaced 6 pickets in the central 20-foot section where Marissa hung her items most frequently. By 2022, I had replaced 4 more. By 2023, I had replaced another 4. Total fence repairs across 5 years, 14 pickets, approximately $1,800 in cedar materials, and 63 hours of my labor at my standard hourly studio rate. The cost of Marissa's daily trespass to me had been, by my own conservative ledger, approximately $13,000 in materials and lost studio time. I had not, before Easter weekend of 2024, ever discussed the laundry situation with Linnea or Anders. I had decided early in 2019 that my children did not need to know about a small, chronic neighborhood problem their father had been documenting. I had assumed, the way fathers of grown children often assume, that my own discretion was a kindness to them. Ulrika had told me, around the 3rd anniversary of the problem in 2021, that my discretion was actually a form of stubbornness, and that Linnea would want to know. I had not listened. Linnea had figured it out anyway, across the years, through small mentions Ulrika had made on phone calls. She had been waiting for me to bring it up. She had decided, by 2023, that she would not bring it up herself. She would wait until I asked. She had been right to wait. She had also been right to walk the studio barn with me the moment she did see the photographs. Linnea came home for Easter weekend in 2024. She arrived on the Friday before Easter with her partner Jorah Lefebvre, a Madison High School English teacher Linnea had been with for 3 years, and a Madison Bakery box of hot cross buns Jorah had picked up. We had dinner at the long oak table Ulrika and I had built ourselves in 2012. After dinner, Linnea asked to walk the studio barn. I gave her the tour. I showed her the new floor loom Ulrika and I had set up in February. I showed her the spring dye batch I had running on the small electric kettle. I showed her the yarn fence. I showed her the ledger of repairs. I showed her, on my laptop on the workbench, a small sample of the 1,847 photographs. Linnea looked at the laptop for a long time. She scrolled through 5 years of photographs in silence. She closed the laptop. She said, "Dad, this is continuing trespass under Wisconsin Statute 943.13. You could have sued her for cumulative damages any time in the last 5 years. The statute supports actual damages plus reasonable attorney's fees on a documented pattern. Why didn't you call me?" I told her I was a textile artist. I told her I did not sue people. I told her I had assumed the situation would resolve itself. Linnea said, "Dad, the situation has not resolved itself. The situation has gotten worse for 5 consecutive years. You have replaced 14 pickets. You have lost 63 hours of paid studio time. The situation will not resolve itself." I asked her what she suggested. She said, "Dad, there is another option. You make your own dye. What if you simply dyed the fence permanently? The color of the fence is your business. The fence is your property. Wisconsin law does not require you to maintain your fence in any particular dye state. If your fence happens to be saturated with a permanent fabric dye on the day Marissa hangs her laundry on it, that is her problem, not yours. You have no duty of care to a trespasser regarding the dye fastness of your property." We covered the principle in my second-year property law class. It's called the no duty to improve doctrine. The trespasser takes the trespassed property as she finds it. If she finds it freshly dyed in indigo on the morning she hangs her gala dress on it, the dye consequences are hers. I sat for a long minute. Ulrika brought out a second pot of coffee. I thought about the 14 pickets. I thought about my grandfather, Olaf, carving the rose mailing on the farmhouse doors in 1908. I thought about the long, careful seasons of dye experiments I had run in my studio for 41 years. I thought about my 1,847th time photographing wet laundry on the cedar pickets Anders and I had carved together in 2010. I said, "Linnea, I will think about it." Linnea said, "Dad, take your time. The dye still works in May. It will still work in June. You have the season." I thought about it for 2 weeks. I walked the fence every morning that fortnight. I photographed laundry incidents 1,848, 1,849, all the way through 1,873. I noticed during that fortnight that Marissa had begun hanging her best summer dresses on the fence, 3 white silk pieces I would later identify in her tort claim filings as having been worth, in her own valuation, somewhere between $2,400 and $3,800 each. I noticed that she was preparing for a Madison philanthropic gala, scheduled for the 3rd Friday of May. I noticed that she had been hanging the same white silk gown, a Carolina Herrera piece she had bought in Chicago in 2019, 3 Saturdays in a row to dry after club tennis matches at the Birchwood Vista Country Club. I noticed that the gala was 18 days away. I drove to the Madison Fiber Arts Supply Store on the morning of the 23rd of April. I bought 4 ounces of natural indigo powder, 2 pounds of logwood extract, 3 pounds of ferrous sulfate mordant, and 1 gallon of food-grade linseed oil as a binder. I bought from a Norwegian immigrant supplier named Britta Vandermeer, whose family had run the shop since 1958. Britta asked what the project was. I told her it was a fence-staining project. She raised one eyebrow. She said, in her slow, Scandinavian Wisconsin English, "Bernhard, there is a kind of indigo project a textile artist orders these particular materials for. The kind of project is not a fence." I told her she was correct. I told her the fence would be the artistic medium. She nodded once. She rang up the order at cost. She said, "Bernhard, the next time you bring the world a story like this, please bring me a photograph for my shop wall." I told her I would. In the 2 weeks between Linnea's Easter weekend suggestion and my dye-mixing evening, I had walked the fence at sunrise every morning. I had thought about Anders's hand-carved picket caps. I had thought about my grandfather Olaf carving the rose mauling on the farmhouse doors in 1908 with the same chisel set Anders and I had used in 2010. I had thought about the day I had taught Anders to use that chisel at age 4. He had been sitting on my workbench, his small legs swinging, and I had wrapped his hand around the handle and shown him how to control the cut against the grain. I had thought about whether the dye decision honored the fence or violated it. I had decided, by the morning of the 23rd of April, that the dye decision honored the fence. The fence had been built by Anders and me to last 60 years. The fence had been hand-carved with traditional Norwegian motifs my grandfather Olaf would have recognized. The fence was a piece of work. The dye would protect the work. The dye would also reveal the work. The carved picket caps would stand out in indigo more clearly than they had ever stood out in weathered cedar. The dye was, by every honest measure, an improvement to the underlying piece. I had walked back to the studio barn on the morning of the 23rd of April with the decision made. I had not consulted Anders. I had not consulted Ulrika a second time. The decision had been mine. The dye would be mine. The morning would be mine. I mixed the dye in the studio barn on the evening of the 24th. I used my largest ceramic dyeing pot, a 50-gallon capacity I had bought from an Iowa potter in 2011. The mixture took 6 hours to combine properly. The logwood extract dissolved in hot water at 180 degrees. The indigo reduced through the standard fermentation vat method. The iron mordant was added at the end with the linseed oil binder in a slow whisking process I had learned from a master Japanese indigo artist at a 2009 workshop in Tokyo. The finished mixture filled 11.5 gallons. The mixture was a deep, saturated indigo blue with a slight black sheen from the iron mordant. The mixture would, by every property of every ingredient, bind permanently and irreversibly to natural fiber and wood pulp on contact. The mixture would also be, on contact with cedar, a beautiful and durable wood stain that would not damage the underlying timber. The mixture was, in plain Wisconsin terms, a perfect piece of textile chemistry applied to a non-textile object. I applied the mixture to the entire 220-foot length of the yarn fence on the morning of the 25th of April, 2024, a Tuesday. I started at 7 a.m. I worked with a 4-inch natural bristle brush. I applied 2 full coats. The work took 6 hours. Marissa was at her weekly yoga class in Middleton from 9 to 10:30 and at her standing brunch with her sister at a Madison cafe from 11 to 1. Her Tuesday morning schedule had been the most consistent calendar item in her social life since 2019, by my running observational record. I had timed the dye application around her absence. I finished the second coat at 1:12 p.m. I let the fence dry in the April sun across the afternoon and into the evening. By 8 p.m., the fence was a deep, beautiful, permanent indigo blue. The hand-carved rose-mailing motifs on the picket caps now stood out in a way they had not stood out in 14 years. The fence was, by Ulrika's evening assessment over dinner, the most beautiful piece of work I had ever made outside of an actual tapestry. Marissa hung her white silk Carolina Herrera dress on the fence at 9:14 a.m. on Friday the 28th of April. The dress was wet from a final pre-gala laundering. She had used woolite. She had pinned the dress to the dye-saturated cedar with 3 wooden clothespins. The wooden clothespins began to wick indigo on contact. The dress began to absorb indigo on contact. Within 4 minutes, the bodice of the dress was a soft, pale indigo. Within 15 minutes, the entire dress was a deep, saturated indigo blue, with 3 distinctive, darker stripes where the clothespins had pulled the dye through to the back fabric. Within 30 minutes, the dress was permanently stained Yves Klein International Blue, with no possible recovery to white. Marissa came out to take the dress down at 12:18 p.m. She had been at brunch with her sister. The dress had been hanging on the indigo fence for 3 hours. The scream Marissa made, by Ulrika's later careful report from the kitchen window where she had been watching with binoculars and a small notebook, lasted approximately 46 seconds. The scream was followed by approximately 90 seconds of recognizable profanity in 3 languages. The scream was followed by Marissa unpinning the dress, holding the indigo silk in front of her face, and then running across her own yard back toward her house, carrying the indigo dress at arm's length. The scream concluded with Marissa slamming her own back door at 12:21 p.m. She also lost, by the inventory I would compile later from her own filed tort claim, 2 bath towels, 3 t-shirts, 4 pairs of underwear, 2 pillowcases, a set of yoga pants, and a Hermes silk scarf. The total fabric value Marissa would claim in her subsequent Dane County small claims action was $14,260. The die held. I want to describe the morning of the 28th in more detail, because the morning was both the climax and the quietest piece of the entire 5-year arc. Ulrika had been the one to notice, at 8:45 a.m., that Marissa was crossing the backyard with the laundry basket. She had called me from the kitchen up to the studio barn loft where I had been working on a small tapestry. "Bernhard, she's coming, with the dress. Come and watch." I had set down the bobbin. I had walked down the loft ladder. I had joined Ulrika at the kitchen window. We had 2 pairs of binoculars on the windowsill, Ulrika's birding pair from her arboretum years, and a smaller pair I keep for moth observation at dusk. We each took one. We watched. We did not speak. We did not photograph. We had stopped photographing at incident 1873 on the 23rd of April. The die on the fence was, by my standing decision, the final piece of documentation we would need. The photograph the moment would produce would not be on my Nikon D7100. The photograph would be on Marissa's white silk Carolina Herrera. The exposure would be 3 hours. She pinned the dress at 9:14. I watched the bodice begin to absorb at 9:18. I watched the full saturation occur between 9:30 and 9:44. I watched the small lateral capillary spreading that gave the dress its eventual deep banded color pattern. I watched at one point, around 10:30, a stray garter snake cross the backyard 6 feet from the fence and pause to inspect the new blue color before continuing toward Marissa's hosta bed. I watched the morning sun rise to its high April angle. I watched the dye finish its chemical work. I lowered the binoculars. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I poured Ulrika a cup. We sat at the kitchen table at 11:30 and ate the leftover slice of carrot cake Linnea had brought home for Easter. We did not, by mutual agreement, speak again until Marissa returned at 12:18. The morning was quiet. The morning was perhaps the calmest morning of the entire 5 years. Some pieces of work are loud in the way they begin and quiet in the way they finish. This was that kind of piece. Marissa filed her tort claim on the 2nd of May. Linnea responded on the 3rd. Linnea's response included the 1,847 photographs, the picket replacement ledger, the studio time loss calculation, and a counterclaim for continuing trespass damages totaling $87,000 under Wisconsin Statute 943.13. The Dane County Circuit Court magistrate, a 30-year veteran named Magnus Vandermeer, no relation to Britta the fiber arts supplier or Caspian the Indiana stepson, just a coincidence of Wisconsin-Norwegian surnames, held a settlement conference on the 14th of June. The conference ran 4 hours. Magnus had reviewed every photograph. Magnus had reviewed the ledger. Magnus had also reviewed, on Linnea's motion, the Birchwood Estates HOA financial records. The HOA financial records, when pulled, showed that Marissa Brockhurst Lockhart had been billing the Birchwood Estates HOA $1,200 a month for professional community textile and aesthetic consulting through her own LLC for 36 straight months. Total embezzlement, $43,200. The records also showed that Marissa had filed no income taxes on the LLC consulting income. The state of Wisconsin's Department of Revenue, alerted by Magnus's mandatory disclosure to the Dane County prosecutor, opened a tax fraud investigation on the 15th of June. The Dane County prosecutor opened a criminal embezzlement file the same week. Marissa's tort claim was dismissed at the settlement conference. My counterclaim was awarded in part, $52,000 in cumulative continuing trespass damages, payable within 90 days. The criminal embezzlement case proceeded through the summer. Marissa took a no-contest plea in October. 18 months Wisconsin state custody at the Taycheedah Correctional Institution. 3 years probation. Restitution of $43,200 to the Birchwood Estates HOA Reserve Fund. A permanent ban from serving on any Wisconsin Common Interest Community Board. Tatum Lockhart was not charged. He had not known about his wife's HOA accounting. He filed for divorce in November. He moved to Middleton in December. The Birchwood Estates HOA elected a new board in November. The new president is a 61-year-old retired Madison High School principal named Henrica Lefebvre. Yes, another Lefebvre. This is a part of Wisconsin where the Lefebvre name goes back to the 1850s Acadian migration, just a regional coincidence of surnames. Henrica repealed the anti-clothesline bylaw within her first month. She and her husband walked up to our porch on a Saturday afternoon in early December with a casserole and a written apology from the new board. The apology was signed by all 6 new board members. Ulrika baked them a coffee cake. They stayed 2 hours. We have been friends since. In the months between the settlement conference and the plea, the Birchwood Estates community went through its own quiet reorganization. 6 households along Marissa's row of the development sent us handwritten notes of apology across June and July. The notes had been their own initiative. The notes had not been organized by the new HOA board. The notes had been written individually, posted to our mailbox individually, with no coordination. One note was from a retired Madison nurse named Maya Halloran, who had lived in Lot 25 since 2014, and who had been quietly horrified by Marissa's behavior for 6 years. One was from a young Madison architect named Stellan Aldrich, who had moved into Lot 19 in 2021, and who had told his wife on the day they moved in, "That fence north of us is one of the most beautiful pieces of folk woodworking I have ever seen in person. Whoever owns it is an artist." One was from a Madison High School chemistry teacher named Astrid Bouchard, whose father had been a Wisconsin Public Radio cultural affairs producer in the 1990s, and who had grown up listening to interviews with Wisconsin folk artists, including, by her own discovery in November, a 1997 interview with my grandfather Olaf's last surviving sibling about the rosemalling carvings at our farmhouse. Astrid sent me a digital file of the 1997 interview. I had not heard the interview before. I listened to it on the kitchen radio on a Saturday afternoon with Ulrika. My great-aunt Solveig's voice, 86 at the time of the interview, with her telemark accent still intact after 50 years in Wisconsin, described my grandfather's hands carving the farmhouse door in 1908. The interview ran 28 minutes. I cried for the last 12 minutes. Astrid had not known what she had sent us. She had thought it was a small gesture. It had been the largest gift we had received in the year. The Madison Capital Times ran a feature on the case on the 20th of November. The reporter, a 34-year-old Madison cultural affairs journalist named Stellan Brookmeyer, no relation to Octavius the Indiana mill historian, just a Norwegian-Wisconsin coincidence of surnames, wrote a 2,000-word piece titled "The Bluest Laundry in Dane County." The article ran with a half-page color photograph Stellan had taken of the indigo yarn fence in the late autumn sun. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday Culture section. The article was syndicated to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel the following weekend. The article was picked up by Wisconsin Public Radio's morning program in late December. The story brought my textile work to wider attention. The Madison Arts Center invited me for a solo exhibition in their main gallery in March of 2025. I accepted. The exhibition included 12 tapestries from my back catalog and a single newly commissioned piece called Continuing Trespass, a 6-foot by 4-foot indigo wool tapestry that incorporated stitched cotton fragments from a recovered piece of Marissa's stained underwear, returned to me through legal discovery, then donated to the project with her unwilling consent under the settlement terms, on a background of hand-dyed indigo wool. The piece, when exhibited, attracted considerable press. The Milwaukee Art Museum acquired the piece in May for $34,000. The acquisition price went, by my and Ulrika's standing instruction, to the Wisconsin Legal Aid Society's Small Property Owner Tenant Rights Program. The check was delivered to Wisconsin Legal Aid by Linnea personally in June. Britta Vandermeer at the Madison Fiber Arts Supply Shop got her photograph in October. I dropped it off in person on a Saturday afternoon during a Madison errand run. The photograph showed the indigo fence in late September, with the carved picket cap motifs catching the afternoon light. Britta framed the photograph that same week. The frame hangs above her shop register. Britta has, since then, sold approximately 41 indigo dye starter kits to other Wisconsin fiber artists who have come into the shop after reading the Stellan Brookmeyer article. Britta credits the fence with the small revival of natural indigo practice she has seen in Dane County across the past year. She has invited me back to do a small workshop at the shop in the fall. I have agreed. The workshop is scheduled for the third Saturday of October. I will demonstrate the indigo vat method I used on the fence. Britta will sell the dye supplies at cost. The proceeds from the workshop registration will go, by my standing instruction, to a small Madison Textile Arts Education Fund Linnea has helped administer since the case closed. The yarn fence remains indigo blue. I have recoated it twice, once in 2025 and once this past spring, to maintain the color. The cost of materials per recoating is approximately $180. The labor is 6 hours. I do the work myself in late April every year. I have begun, since the case closed, calling the work the spring bluing, the way my grandfather Olaf would have called the annual oil refresh of his rosemalling, the spring repainting. The work is small. The work is regular. The work matters. The fence is a small piece of the Kestrel family practice now. It will outlast me. Anders has said he will keep the fence blue after I am gone. I believe him. He has my grandfather's hands. He carved the original picket caps. He will keep the color. Anders drove down from Milwaukee for the first weekend of May to see the fence in person. He had not been told about the project until Linnea had emailed him the link to the Madison Capital Times article in November. He had read the article in his Milwaukee studio. He had laughed for a long time. He had called me that evening. He had said, "Dad, I'm coming down this spring. I want to see her in indigo." He had walked the fence with his glassblower's eye for color. He had stood at the south end of the run for a long time. He had said, "Dad, the blue makes the picket cap stronger. Mom and Grandpa Olaf would have liked this." He had set up a small folding chair in the studio barn doorway and sketched the fence in charcoal for 2 hours. The charcoal sketch hangs framed in his Milwaukee studio. The sketch is titled, in his quiet hand, Father's Blue. He has been offered 3 different prices for the sketch by Milwaukee galleries. He has declined all 3. The sketch is for him. If you have ever had a Karen treat your fence like her clothesline, leave a comment below. Tell me what she tried. Tell me what you did back. I read every one. The stories you send me are the reason I keep telling these. If this one warmed you, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Next week, we've got a single mother in rural Indiana whose HOA Karen tried to tear down her son's swing set. There is a wedding video the Karen did not know was running. That story is coming Friday. In the meantime, build your fence with your own hands. Photograph the trespass. Mix your own dye. The cedar belongs to the property. The property belongs to the family. The dye does not lie. A small note about the new HOA president, Henrika Lefebvre. Henrika had been the principal at Madison West High School for 19 years before her retirement. She had taught Linnea AP English in 1998, when Linnea was a junior. She had taught Anders the same class in 2001. She had attended Anders's glass-blowing studio opening in Milwaukee in 2012. She had attended Linnea's law firm partnership reception in 2022. She had not, in any of the 26 years our families had known each other, ever discussed HOA matters with us. The reason had been simple. Henrika had decided in 2018, the year Marissa moved into Birchwood Estates, that she would not subject our family to her observations about Marissa's behavior, because she had not wanted to seem like a gossipy neighbor. Henrika is a careful woman. She had waited until Marissa was removed from the board before she had walked across our property line for the first time in 6 years. When she had come for coffee in early December with the casserole and the apology, she had said, sitting at our kitchen table, "Bernhard, Ulrika, I have wanted to say something to you about Marissa for years. I did not because it would have made the situation worse. I am very sorry. The board should have stopped her. The board did not. I will never let it happen again on my watch. Ulrika had cried. I had cried. Henrika had cried. Wisconsin Norwegian women cry in a very particular way at kitchen tables. The crying does not need much sound. The crying says everything anyway. Ulrika and I held the first annual Indigo Day at the studio barn on the second Saturday of May, the year after the case closed. 48 visitors registered. They came from Madison, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and one couple drove down from Duluth, Minnesota. Britta Vandermeer brought a small selection of dye supplies from her shop. Anders came down from Milwaukee for the weekend and demonstrated his glass and fiber wall pieces. Linnea ran a small registration table and a coffee urn in the barn doorway. Ulrika led a 1-hour tour of the dye garden. I led a 2-hour vat dye demonstration in the studio. We dyed approximately 6 pounds of natural wool in front of the visitors. We sent every visitor home with a small skein of the indigo wool, tied with a Norwegian-style yarn knot Ulrika had taught the registrants at the start of the day. The day closed at 4 p.m. with a small reading from my grandfather Olaf's 1908 immigration journal. Ulrika read the entry describing his first day of carving on the farmhouse door. The entry is 2 paragraphs long. The entry ends with the sentence, "The wood will hold the cut for as long as the wood lasts. The cut will remember the hand that made it. The wood and the hand belong to each other." Visitors clapped, gently, the way Wisconsin people clap at a reading they will be thinking about for a long time. Indigo Day has run every May since. The registrant count last year was 112. The waiting list for next year is already at 140. Ulrika is talking about renting a tent. A small final note. The 50-gallon ceramic dyeing pot I used to mix the original 11 gallons of indigo on the evening of the 24th of April is the same pot I had bought from the Iowa potter in 2011. The Iowa potter's name is Mareike Brookmeyer. Yes, another Brookmeyer, no relation to the Indiana mill historian Octavius or the Madison cultural affairs journalist Stellan. Just a generational coincidence of Norwegian-derived Midwestern surnames. Mareike heard about the case from a mutual friend at a Wisconsin Fiber Arts Conference in the fall of the case year. She sent me a handwritten letter in November. The letter said only, in her careful potter's hand, "Bernhard, the pot did good work. Tell the pot I said well done." I read the note to the pot at the next morning's dye session. The pot, by every observable measure, has been working harder ever since. Some pieces of equipment carry a kind of accumulated memory of every batch they have held. Mareike had told me, when she had sold me the pot in 2011, that her grandmother had thrown the original pot on a Wisconsin treadle wheel in 1947 in a small kiln pottery operation outside Mineral Point. Mareike had inherited the pot from her grandmother in 1989 and had used it herself for 22 years before she sold it to me. The pot is, by direct chain of custody, an artifact of 3 women's pottery work across 77 years before it became the vessel that mixed the fence dye on the evening of the 24th of April, 2024. Some pieces of equipment know what they are being used for. Some pieces of equipment carry the dignity of the work forward across the decades. The pot is 23 years old. The pot will outlive me. The pot will outlive the fence. The pot will eventually go to Anders with the chisel set, and the small notebook of my grandmother Astrid's indigo recipes Ulrika has been transcribing across the past 3 winters. The 3rd Saturday of October has passed. Britta's workshop at the Madison Fiber Arts Shop drew 36 registrants. We mixed indigo across 2 hours. Britta cried at the end of the demonstration. I gave her a small framed cedar offcut from the fence, a single carved picket cap I had set aside in 2010. The offcut hangs above her register now, beside the photograph. Some workshops finish, some carvings travel. That is the story of the yarn fence.
First, this one was about Wisconsin's textile artist who knew his own dye the way other people know their own children. Marissa Brookhart Lockhart did not lose because Barney Cashel was a meaner neighbor. She lost because he had been hanging her wet laundry on his hand-built cedar fence for almost 5 years, and Bernie had spent 40 years learning exactly how to bind indigo to a piece of natural fiber so that it would not let go. The lesson, friends, is that the property you own can defend itself if you have a patient and the materials. If you have ever had a Karen treat your fence like her clothesline, leave a comment below and tell me your story. I read everyone. They remind me we are not alone. Be surprised so the next one finds you.